So we've heard quite a lot today about cooperation and collaboration, multi-stakeholder internet governance. We've heard other speakers refer to an identity crisis in internet governance, or internet governance having an identity crisis. Another one I wrote down was, we have a governance system that has given up on what it was meant to govern. Since we are at a really sort of critical juncture now with the Global Digital Compact coming up and the review of the World Summit on the Information Society, I'd just like to ask the speakers to reflect on the things that we've heard today, and how does NetThing fit into this world, really? I might just sort of start down the end, Paul, with you, and if you can just sort of any comments or observations that you would like to add on that.
Not on mute. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Wilson from APNIC. It's a pleasure to be here, and as this is a kind of a closing session, it's only the first day, but I hope it's still okay to say welcome to Brisbane, which is my home and the home of APNIC for the last 25 years. So I'm very glad to see you all here. NetThing. Well, NetThing has had a bit of history, including a hiatus for a few years, and it might not be back at critical mass yet, but I know that it can, and it will be if we continue this process. This is part of a global multi-stakeholder IGF system, and there are events, I know from a regional perspective, that there are many, many events, not only the regional event itself, but other national events in Afghanistan and China and Indonesia and India and Japan and New Zealand, Taiwan, Vanuatu, Vietnam. There's a lot of them. And this is all part of a global process, a network, a systematic, to some extent, a network of internet governance that, sorry, I've just scrolled myself. It's nearly 20 years old, this process. So, across the world and across the regions and the national events, the different events, the schools of internet governance, the youth internet governance sessions, it's extremely vibrant. I think it's extremely valuable. I think there are huge opportunities that come from this network of events and organisations to continue to advance internet governance at the local level, at regional and global levels. And I think I speak from a regional perspective, but having watched Australia over many years, there's also been something of a hiatus in Australia and in Australia's sort of level of activity. But Australia's been a trailblazer in internet governance, and since the very early days, Australian government, Australian stakeholders have been active in many sectors of the internet, including multi-stakeholder internet governance processes from .au, auDA. It's our involvement in the formation of ICANN, within ICANN, the CCNSO and the GAC. The fact actually that APNIC moved to Australia back in 1998, I think, was a good sign for the nation. So I don't want to be parochial about it, and I'm not parochial, but I think Australia has been punching above its weight in so many ways for so many years. It's not just in the traditional internet sector either. It's in ITU, in APEC and other fora. And even with other things on their agenda at those events, Australians have been supporting the multi-stakeholder model. They've been brokering the agreements. They've been helping to create policy and building partnerships in support of this system of internet governance, which has been recognised so well in Australia. And I think what we saw today, this morning, just to reflect on the opening, was to hear Australia saying again, as they did through Ambassador Dowling, that Australia supports the multi-stakeholder model. And I think that is an invitation to the Australian community. It's an invitation to all organisations and citizens of this country to be involved and to take Australia up on that commitment to get involved in a real way with internet governance, from not just from a discussing the point of view of discussion, but practical processes and practical outcomes that can come from a systematic approach to internet governance, a systematic approach to multi-stakeholderism that I really do think that thanks to the people who've supported this event, thanks particularly to auDA for its long-term support of the AU IGF come NetThing, I really think after a hiatus, we're in a very good position to possibly present forward a model that could be developed in Australia by this community that could be very influential. It could be very influential across all of those different initiatives I mentioned before in so many different countries, not to mention the regional and global level. So that's what I hope would be coming out of this event. And as I said before, I think the key thing is for the wider community to take up the Australian government on the invitation we heard this morning to be part of a multi-stakeholder system. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. So Ian, perhaps you can reflect on that and the invitation to take up.
Thanks, Annaliese, and thanks, Paul. I think I'd very much agree with your comments here. For me, I think this morning's sessions and the rest of the day's sessions have really highlighted the challenges facing the internet governance community over the coming years. And for me, and I think the Australian government, quite simply, it's critical that we continue to demonstrate and dog food, if you will, the importance of multi-stakeholderism in internet governance. I think it's critical that we show this is a process that works. Consensus-making policy is the best way to approach these challenges, and I think the NetThing community is the best place to do that in Australia. I think we're facing a pivotal moment, and to be frank, the Australian government really needs the Australian community, civil society, academia, the technical community, to really lend their advice and expertise to tackle the challenges in the coming years. The Australian government's very good at doing a range of a lot of really important things, but I'm also quite cognizant that this room captures quite a broad range and depth of expertise, and that's going to be absolutely critical in navigating the coming processes. A lot of those processes will unfortunately be multilateral first processes, where as much as we would very much like the multi-stakeholder community to have a seat at the table, the Australian government will be your voice in some of these processes. And I think it's absolutely critical that we're able to leverage the entire community in putting our best foot forward and helping shape the global agenda when it comes to internet governance issues. I think there's a great opportunity to drive a national dialogue on some of these challenges. I think there's an important role to help highlight some of these challenges as well, and explaining what internet governance means to those outside of this room, bringing along a lot of other portions of our community and society, and really showing how they can get involved in some of these processes. I think we've really seen a lot of these good community linkages over the course of today, and really demonstrated how diverse and important the Australian community as a whole is. And I think it's beholden to all of us in this room to go back to our communities, to talk, to consult, and then come back together, not just once a year, but over the course of the year, to address some of these challenges. So I think Australia is a fantastic country. I think we punch well above our weight internationally. And I think now is a critical time for us to come together and really put our heads together to show and help guide some of these processes internationally. So there's obviously a lot more to say on this, and be very keen to continue this discussion after this.
Thanks, Ian. I think that's important note you made about, driving a national dialogue. I think it is important to remind ourselves periodically that multi-stakeholder model is a means to an end rather than the end in itself. Sandra, you are the inaugural chair of NetThing. I would just like to ask you to share your reflections or observations, or just any ideas about the future of NetThing, where we might go to, how we can perhaps, get involved in some of the things that Ian was just referring to.
Firstly, thank you, and hello to anyone that's left out there in the online audience, let alone the lovely people here in the room. I'm a baby when it comes to internet governance. I've been mucking around, even though I've been in the internet industry for 30 odd years. I've only been mucking around in this IGF stuff for about 4 years. So I've a limited perspective, but one that I think is important to share. Firstly, I concur. I'm in love with the IGF. And I think the stuff that it covers, the issues that it tackles are super, super important. I'm going to speak, though, through the lens of this tiny little thing called NetThing, which is so poor and so under-resourced that the working title of our name 4 years ago, NetThing, is still NetThing because we haven't had any money to actually do any branding. So if we continue this thing, there's this collective view up here that it's a shit name and it'd be really great to change, but it's worked. And I also want to acknowledge that when I picked up what was an incredibly broken AUIGF 4 years ago, I want to acknowledge that Australia has punched above its weight, because I had to learn a stack of stuff coming into this process, that there were a whole bunch of organisations, including AUDA. But when I met Cheryl and others, there was literally no one, and it was broken. A number of civil society organisations were almost bankrupt. AUDA had disappeared. I don't know where the feds were. But APNIC.
They were there, Sandra. That was me.
They were there quietly in the background. But APNIC was there. And I think that's important, because I think that's my call out today. I'm a believer in the IGF, and the luminaries that we just heard from, it's so amazing to be connected to such a powerful thing that has done so much good. But I just want to bring us right down here to Australia and the AUIGF, or the NetThing. We've got some serious challenges. I've only been at it 4 years, and it takes volunteer effort, but it also takes all parts of the multi-stakeholder sector and movement to kind of chip in. And Cheryl can attest that we're running this thing off the smell of an oily rag, right? And if it wasn't for AUDA this year, I'm concerned it wouldn't even happen, or certainly wouldn't happen on this scale. So I think the shout out here is, how do we keep this thing going when most of us are doing it on volunteer efforts, and we scrap together just enough every year to do the thing again? So I think that's a call out to all of us from every corner of the multi-stakeholder room, that unless we all chip in, then it's not going to be great anyway, right? Because the voices won't be brought. I think the second thing I've noticed over the past few years is it takes a lot of effort. This is not my full-time job. I just turn up as an interested member of civil society, and civil society is exhausted here in Australia. It's broken, it's underfunded, it's under-resourced. And so if we want one of the critical speakers at the table, we have to find mechanisms that don't overload an already overloaded civil society. So another kind of shout out for how do we create an environment that gives equal participation. Getting the private sector involved over the past few years, man, where are they? We have done shout outs to Google, to Telstra, to Facebook. Atlassian's here, yay. And Amazon's turned up over the last few years, yay. But this stuff is really critical, right? So where are they, and how do we get them involved? And apart from the registrars and the resellers and those around the AUDA ecosystem, which thank you very much, Affilius and George Pongus, who's just been from GoDaddy, just a long-serving internet policy kind of dude. So again, another shout out for, we need everybody at the table. So I suppose when I think about NetThing, I'm an absolute believer in it. It has to continue, but it needs help. This is a shout out to everyone to kind of tap their networks. And the last thing I suppose I want to say is and I think I know Cheryl and Ian and Paul well enough to say this, how do we grow the next cohort, right? There's a bunch of tired people up here. So how do we grow the next cohort? And the fellowship program that was launched this morning is an awesome start. Running the youth IGF alongside is awesome. I know auDA's going to make some substantial moves into the growing the internet governance capability in the country. So that's all fantastic, but it just needs to continue if we're going to continue using this as a platform to tackle those really tough issues that we've been talking about today. So thanks for letting me pontificate on how no money we have, and could we have some money, please?
I've got my own, thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. Cheryl.
Oh, thank you, ma'am. All right. I think we have opportunity. I think timing is perfect to take up those opportunities. Let me give you a little brief history, however. Many years ago, and I do mean many, auDA, our enormous supporter here for NetThing to this day, ran the AU IGF. It was run well. It got good audience participation. It was a little top down. It was not perhaps as grassroots as we're certainly running, and it certainly wasn't run on the smell of an oily rag, but it got there. Balls were dropped, things happen. It stopped for a while. 5 of them ran, and we had about 5 or 7 years when nothing happened. Then a certain ambassador for cyber affairs gathered 6 or 7 of us down in Canberra and said, can we get back to this? Because, the sorts of things Ian was saying just now, he was thinking then. And might I just mention, our current ambassador seems to be grabbing that bull by the horns and just going to assist us to take it from strength to strength to strength. So I see, sure, we are running on the smell of an oily rag, but sponsors are turning up. Identity Digital has now sponsored us for the next 4 years. That's brilliant. I've just heard our sponsor that is kind of going to get your wine and your soft drink and your nibbles has got us in next year's budget. More about that later. And is talking about ongoing. Our fantastic Indigenous Fellowship has 4 years bootstrapped, absolutely, funding, but this year kicked off by Identity Digital. Welcome all those people that you were suggesting should be playing along. Come one, come all, let's build this out. Let's make the conversation, the storytelling, the opportunities, the grandmas, the grandpas, the mum and pop shops, the remote and rurals. Can I say, why are the youth in another room all day? Can we have some Aussie? There's what, 1 Aussie in there and 1 remote. Can we have 25 actual youth in the room? Yes, please. Right? Where do we define youth? Under 25? Well, no, they don't. They're sort of beyond that. Where's my 15-year-olds? Where's my 12-year-olds? We're the digital natives. So we can do a really good job, but we do have to collaborate. We do have to work together, and we do have to share both our diversities and respect each other's variations in views. And that's what NetThing in an annual aspect can do, but that's not all it should do. It does need, as you've heard, to get roadshows happening, to get outreach going on, to get curricula developed, for heaven's sake, to get, why you can code or learn about coding in sand with a bit of a stick and the right sort of diagrams and advice. All of that, meeting the need with the possible solution, can be talked about in a Australianly unique need met by something like NetThing. Why is it NetThing and not AUIGF? Because we had to build trust back into the system, and it's hopefully where we are now. And just before I stop my rant, because nothing like a good rant, is there? We both enjoy them. I just want to recognise 2 things. The fabulous folk I'm looking out at, those recognised faces. right? I'm seeing so many of you who have built not just the internet, but this whole set of conversations that go around on what many of us call the significantly interested parties, the people who do spend that exhausting volunteer time to talk about all of these things together and to try and build a better model. But I'm seeing 2/3 of new faces. Now, that's the exciting part. I'll stop now, ma'am.
Thank you, Cheryl. I just heard from all of the speakers about, what we can be, what NetThing can do, what we can do. Can we ask everyone to briefly reflect on what do we need to do that? Is it just the lack of funds, or is there something else? Like what is it that we need to do as a NetThing community to make these things happen? I'm not sure who wants to go first. Paul?
It'll come on.
Thanks, Annaliese. Look, it's about cooperation. It's about multi-stakeholder cooperation. Actually thinking back to the origins of internet governance, as an English speaker, I was quite relaxed with the term governance, but realised after a few years that in many languages and cultures, the only thing that governs is a government. And so the idea, the whole term of internet governance has been quite problematic. And I think we should be talking about cooperation. We should be talking about the fact that in order to make this thing happen, we need true multi-stakeholder cooperation. But we also need to accept that cooperation and coordination never happen for free. It's kind of a mythical thing that somehow all we need to do is cooperate and coordinate and magical things will happen, but they won't. And so the volunteer system where the volunteers are adding cooperation and coordination on a very slim budget just doesn't cut it. It's not sustainable. It doesn't build an institution. It doesn't build the sort of memory and the real momentum that we need to be going forward. So I would hope that we have that in Australia there is a true multi-stakeholder cooperation that builds on. I think Australia has got, although as Sandra said, it's lean. Australia's got a very strong history of non-government community organisations and even of government sort of delegating or relying on the non-profit sector, particularly in the social sector, to produce policy, to give genuine feedback on policy, to join working groups and interest groups across government. I think we've got that tradition that's really strong, and in some cases, those NGOs is not a term used very much in Australia, but those community organisations are funded by government and can be funded to at least a subsistence level. And I think to really bring folks in, I was very happy to see this morning the breadth of contributions, and I think we've come a long way actually in that hiatus period in which, since the early Australian IGF, where we really do have an appetite now for the consumer researchers, for the consumer voice to come, for the Indigenous Australian voices to come to this table, and I think openness is not enough. I mean, to be open to all comers is one thing, but it's a bit like being non-discriminatory. It doesn't really achieve anything in the practical environment that we're in. Multi-stakeholderism is much more intentional. It should be much more intentional in that it's more like positive discrimination or affirmative action than simply, non-discrimination. And so I think that's another need for coordination and resources is to put that effort into active and kind of radical inclusion into the process, and really kind of nagging people who need to be here to come along and be here. I just really have a feeling that at this time in Australia, the current environment is a good one in which to work on that model deliberately in a true encompassing multi-stakeholder way that can actually be a systematic model and process which can provide some leadership to others. Thanks.
Cool. Anyone else? Ian?
Yeah, I very much agree with everything you've just said, Paul. And the only point I just wanted to pick up on is I think maybe a systematic approach with focus and intention. Let's be deliberate about the types of things we want to talk about and discuss and move forward. I think now's the time to bring razor focus to the issues that we care about as a country. And I think bringing that focus will help drive NetThing forward and help it be its best version of itself. So thank you.
I'd like to agree with Ian. I think NetThing, insert new name, one day. There's no other spot to rally around the topics that we've talked about today. So I think I'd love to just NetThing to continue doing that. The hyper focus, perhaps as an experiment for the next couple of years, would be really great. And I suppose I say that because, and I'll admit my ignorance here. The topics are so broad, right? When you look at the IGF themes, and I just don't think that we can focus on all of them right now at NetThing. So I would argue for a hyper focus as an experiment for the next couple of years. And my last call out is for anyone that can give the time. If at the end of this week there's 3 or 4 new organisations or humans that want to come and join the open steering committee, then our respective rants will have been a success. So I will judge that at the end of the week, but I really like the idea of hyper-focusing, but I don't have an exact view on what that means, but I think that's needed.
I agree on focusing, absolutely, because you're right. We can't drink from the fire hose, which is what would happen if you tried to bring in everything from a global IGF. It has to be our national initiative. And so there's going to be very unique things and very specific points of difference. For example, you also heard today that, IGF is somewhere where decision makers go but don't make decisions. Well, we could decide differently in a national perspective. That's up to us. We have the opportunity to write our own roadmap here. I'm using roadmap advisedly because, of course, AUDA has the fundamentals of a roadmap already written. But we can insert our own program, our own 3-year plan, our own 5-year plan, and look at what is right and, of course, what will change. Because one thing guaranteed, something else will come at you from left of field. There's always and we hadn't thought about that going to happen. Now we need to talk about it. And there's going to be certain things become more or less urgent. That's okay, because that can be our decision. But the facilitation is really, really important. And it's not necessarily hugely expensive. Sometimes it's a matter of taking it to, instead of bringing people to us. And we haven't explored those options. When we started, even NetThing, sorry, but it is still the working name, 5 years ago, nobody was as keen on remote participation as we are now. We've had, Annaliese will tell you, I'd love you to give you the numbers later, but, really, really good online following, a group numbers following us online today. So, it's a different thing that we're dealing with from even just pre and post COVID. So let's take the opportunities and make the best of them. Thanks.
Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you to all of our speakers. We are sort of reaching the end of our time, but we do have drinks coming up. So hopefully we can continue these conversations. We would love to hear from all of you about, the future of NetThing and how we can make it continue building on it and have it go from strength